1930s Lost Heaven. A young cab driver named Tommy Angelo makes one choice that changes everything. One night, two mobsters crash into his life.
Get up, Paul! There's a taxi!
And from that moment on, he's pulled into the world of crime, loyalty, and betrayal. But loyalty has a cost. Now, with his life on the line and secrets that could bring down a mob boss, Tommy must decide. Will he risk everything to survive, or will the life he chose be his undoing? Stay tuned to dive into a story where every decision could be his last. Mafia opens in 1938 as gangster Tommy Angelo arrives at a little diner to meet with an Irish cop named Detective Norman. Tommy's come to Norman to ask for police protection for himself and his family, but Norman, abrasive and impatient, scoffs at the idea. Tommy insists that he doesn't expect something for nothing, and that what he knows can help bring down a notorious mob boss named Salieri. Norman, still skeptical, demands to hear the whole story before he'll promise anything, so Tommy obliges. 1930. As Tommy's story begins, he's nothing more than a young cab driver, trying to make a living during the Great Depression in the New York-Chicago-inspired city of Lost Heaven. His luck changes late one night when a couple of mobsters named Sam and Paulie accidentally cross his path. Wounded and fleeing a bunch of rival gangsters from the Morello family, the two crash their car, hold Tommy at gunpoint, and order him to drive them to safety. Following a tense, gunfire-filled car chase, Tommy takes his kidnappers to Little Italy, where he learns that they work for the Salieri crime family. Tommy's then rewarded for his service and offered more work, which he says he'll think about. Really though, Tommy has no intention of ever accepting. "Better to be poor and alive than rich and dead, right?" he asked Norman in his narration. The next day, it seems like Tommy's going to follow through on his vow of poverty, but fate has other ideas. After taking a few fares to their destinations, he stops for a coffee break in Little Italy, only to be immediately assaulted by a couple of the Morello mobsters from the previous night, who remembered his cab. Fleeing on foot, Tommy decides to call in the favor he's owed by the Salieris, and leads the thugs on a chase to Salieri's bar, where they're gunned down and disposed of. Following the incident, Tommy accepts the protection offered by Don Salieri and is hired on as a driver. To test his mettle and give him a chance to get back at Morello's thugs, Salieri sends him, along with Paulie, the Joe Pesci-looking goon from the other night, to wreck a few cars outside of Morello's bar. The vandalism goes well enough that Tommy is then entrusted with driving Paulie and Sam around as they extort protection money from businesses around Lost Heaven. Sam and Paulie walk into the hotel while Tommy waits with the car, and no sooner has Tommy lit a cigarette than a couple of gunshots go off, and Paulie stumbles out, wounded again. The Morellos have decided to muscle in on the motel, and they order Paulie and Tommy to beat it. Sam, meanwhile, has been taken hostage so they can squeeze him for information. Obviously, Tommy can't let that situation stand, and so he continues what will be a long cycle of saving Paulie and Sam's asses after they've been kidnapped and or wounded. Putting on his best badass face, he draws a pistol, finds a rear entrance, and proceeds to perforate every living thing inside the motel. After turning the place into shooting gallery, Tommy rescues Sam and is confronted by one last Morello mobster, who escapes with the protection money. Giving chase, Tommy gets a nice tour of the bucolic backroads around Lost Heaven as he chases the bastard down and kills him. 1932. After a couple of presumably uneventful years driving for Salieri, Tommy is approached with a special request from the old man. Salieri's got some serious cash riding on an auto race, but one of the new entrants worries him. Some European hotshot has entered the race with what might be the fastest car in the world, and Salieri can't allow an unfair advantage, especially when it's an advantage against him. Salieri therefore asks Tommy to sneak onto the speedway, steal the car, and take it to a mechanic named Lucas Bertone for some modifications. Bertone, by the way, is instrumental for the rest of the game in giving Tommy side missions and helping him steal better and faster cars. The operation goes off without a hitch, but the next morning, Salieri's favorite driver shows up with a broken arm, It turns out the entire neighborhood was backing Salieri's driver as well, so in order to save face, Tommy is ordered to enter the race, which of course, he wins. Following his success on the track, Tommy meets Sarah, the daughter of Salieri's bartender, Luigi. Some nights later, Luigi asks Tommy to walk Sarah home. It seems some local thugs have been menacing her, and she's worried for her safety. Sure enough, her worries are well-founded, and the punks show up to harass Sarah and Tommy on the walk home. And when they get violent and try to assault Sarah, Tommy goes ballistic and kicks all their asses at once. Naturally, Sarah gets really turned on by all this, and after she dresses Tommy's wounds, we're treated to a vague, bare shoulders love scene that predates Mass Effect's hot alien action by a full 5 years. What happens next is one of the most pivotal events in the game. Salieri isn't happy with these punks trying to make trouble on his turf, and so he orders Tommy and Paulie to send them a message, one delivered to kneecaps by baseball bats. Unfortunately, the plan hits a snag when some of the gang members turn out to be packing heat, and Tommy and Paulie have no choice but to return fire. Even more unluckily, the last hood they kill turns out to be the son of a city councilman, and the only surviving punk witnesses the murder. This is what we call foreshadowing. Soon, Tommy's assignments begin to take on a darker bent. Salieri's consigliere, Frank, approaches Tommy with orders to murder the owner of a high-class brothel, who has recently decided to switch his allegiance to Morello. To make sure that the message is clear to anyone considering a similar change, Tommy is to then blow up the manager's office and escape. And while he's at it, he'll need to murder a prostitute who's been passing information about Salieri's activities to Morello. After entering the hotel, gunning down the owner, and making short work of the guards, Tommy finds the girl's room and confronts her in her bathtub, only to find out that she's Sarah's best friend, Michelle. Already uneasy with the idea of killing a woman, Tommy decides to let her live on the condition she leave town and never show her face again. Quick note to all soft-hearted would-be assassins: as innumerable gangster movies have taught us, this will always, always come back to bite you in the ass. Tommy's conscience doesn't keep him from bombing the dead manager's office, of course. And as the hotel's top floor erupts in a huge fireball, Tommy escapes by leaping through a plate glass window. It isn't long before the cops show up, and an extended shootout across the nearby rooftops ensues. Finally, Tommy manages to make his getaway through the open, under-construction steeple of a nearby church. Of course, these things never go smoothly, and the church just so happens to be playing host to the funeral of the punk Tommy and Paulie killed the other night. The surviving kid fingers Tommy as the murderer, leading some of the mourners to open fire, as you do. After turning the church into a slaughterhouse, Tommy is confronted by a priest who asks him why he's committed so terrible a sin. Shrugging off the criticism, Tommy hands the priest a wad of cash to pay for the damages and leaves. 1933. Sometime later, Tommy, Paulie, and a couple of nameless Salieri thugs truck out to a countryside farmhouse to pick up a shipment of Canadian liquor. Sam's supposed to be there waiting for them, but when Tommy and Paulie show up, things are strangely quiet. Tommy investigates and finds one of Salieri's drivers dead in a truck. More than that, the whole crew's apparently been killed. The farm then erupts with Morello goons and corrupt cops who've made a secret pact to bring down Salieri. They're also holding Sam, badly wounded and kidnapped again, in the loft of a barn. Tommy and Paulie eventually shoot their way through the soldiers and escape, with Tommy machine gunning their pursuers from the back of a truck. Once the three make it back to the relative safety of the city, Sam is dropped at Salieri's private doctor's house to recover, and Tommy limps back to Salieri's to deliver the news to the old man. Of course, things are just beginning to go bad. It turns out that while Tommy and his buddies were shooting their way through the farm, Frank quietly turned informant and handed Salieri's books over to the cops. The penalty is execution, and no flimsy police protection is going to hold back mob justice. The task of hunting Frank down falls to Tommy, who's also ordered to retrieve the evidence Frank handed over. What's more, he's told to murder Frank with a sawed-off shotgun, apparently known in Sicily as a lupara, a signature weapon for executions. After roughing up a couple of stoolies, Tommy figures out where Frank is hiding and follows him to the airport, where, after shooting his way through what feels like dozens of heavily armed G-men, he discovers that Frank's only reason for turning traitor was because Morello was holding his wife and child hostage. If Frank cooperated with prosecutors, however, he and his family would be flown to safety in Europe. Once again, Tommy can't bring himself to commit cold-blooded murder, especially not after hearing a story like that. After Frank leads him to Salieri's books are safe, Tommy orders Frank to get on the plane to Europe and never breathe a word of his existence to anyone. Convinced that Tommy killed Frank and disposed of the body, Salieri holds a full funeral in the man's honor. The heat's not off yet, though. Salieri has to completely disrupt the prosecution's case. While Sam and Paulie are sent out to take care of witnesses, Tommy is tapped to sneak into the prosecutor's mansion, which is crawling with armed guards, and crack a safe to steal back the last shreds of evidence the state has against Salieri. Succeeding with the help of safecracker Salvatore, Tommy hightails it back to safety and celebrates with the rest of the gang. Sometime after that, Tommy marries Sarah and the two have a daughter. Prohibition ends, and Salieri's family uses the money it made running booze to fund legitimate business deals, while still running illegal rackets behind the scenes, of course. 1935. A couple of years later, Tommy and Salieri head out for lunch after Salieri's bodyguard calls in sick. During the meal, a group of Morello thugs drive up and start shooting up the restaurant before tossing in a grenade, killing just about everyone except Salieri and Tommy, who've taken cover behind an overturned table. Unharmed, Salieri distracts the goons while Tommy sneaks around, outflanks them and guns them down. Furious at the attempt on his life, Salieri realized that his bodyguard sold him out, and he and Tommy immediately pay a visit to the man's apartment. Catching him in his underwear and storming past his sobbing wife, the mobsters chase the man into a courtyard where they blow his brains out in front of his neighbors. Being civic-minded people, some of those neighbors respond to the screams of murder by attacking, forcing Tommy to kill them as well. Meanwhile, Morello is surprised to learn that the assassination attempt failed. After consulting with his brother Sergio, he prepares for all-out war against Salieri. Salieri and Tommy aren't resting either, and decide it's time to take the fight to Morello. First, though, they need to weaken him and draw him out, which they decide to do by taking out his strongest allies. First on the list is a certain pain-in-the-ass city councilman. You know, the one with the dead son. To kill him, Tommy has to infiltrate the man's birthday party, held on a steamboat anchored near the city's central island. Disguising himself as a crew member, Tommy sneaks aboard and finds a gun hidden in a restroom, which, in a twist that keeps it from being just another Godfather reference, has been fouled by a mess. He finds it in time for the councilman's speech, though, and as he finishes addressing his guests, Tommy walks up and executes him in front of the crowd. Chaos ensues, and Tommy escapes on a speedboat piloted by Paulie. The mob then turns its attention to Morello's brother Sergio, but a car bomb attempt ends with Sergio's mistress dead instead of him. A second attempt on Sergio's life is botched by a jammed gun, and a third ends with Salieri's hired hitmen turned to paste on a railroad track. After witnessing all three failures, Tommy takes it upon himself to chase Sergio down, ultimately killing the lucky bastard in a dramatic waterfront shootout. Finally, it's time to cap Morello himself. Tommy, Paulie, and Sam are sent to assassinate him while he takes in a show at the theater, but by the time the three arrive, Morello's already leaving. This is one of the few points in the game where things can develop differently, and the encounter either ends with Morello boarding a plane, which is then shot down by Tommy, or driving his car off a cliff, at which point it explodes. Either way, the man is doomed to a fiery death. Following Morello's death, the action cuts back to the continuing chat between Tommy and Norman. As the two talk, Tommy reveals something interesting. In 1920, Salieri and Morello were friends, working together as captains for a crime boss named Peponi. Ambition got the better of them, though, and their actions got the old man killed. After that, it didn't take too long for Morello and Salieri to eventually turn on one another. When he learned this, Tommy says he realized that would be his likely fate as well, killed by his friends because someone got too greedy. 1938. With Lost Heaven's criminal operations under his near-complete control, Salieri hasn't become any less ambitious. A tough-on-crime politician who's secretly running brothels without kicking up anything to the Salieris has begun to irritate him, and so he orders Tommy to take care of the problem. Tommy's equipped with a scoped Mosin Nagant rifle for the job, and, after climbing to the top of a tower in an abandoned prison, Tommy draws a bead on the politician during a speech and dramatically murders him in front of a gathered crowd. Salieri learns about a shipping manifest from a local importer and suddenly develops a craving for some expensive cigars that are being shipped in. Ignoring their protestations that it's a small potatoes heist, Salieri orders Tommy, Sam, and Paulie to steal a truckload of the things. While the three drive to the shipping yards to steal the truck, Paulie floats the idea of knocking over a medium-sized, poorly guarded bank he knows about. But because an independent robbery is something the Don would likely kill them for, Sam and Tommy immediately refuse. But after the surprisingly dangerous caper nearly gets them killed, Paulie and Tommy investigate a smashed crate and find out that the cigars are actually smuggled diamonds. After Salieri fails to tell them about the real nature of the haul, or about the money he's going to get from selling them, Tommy decides to help Paulie out with the robbery. The way Paulie lays it out, the robbery is going to be one last big score that will enable Paulie and Tommy to take it easy. Paulie turns out to be exactly right. For once, the daring robbery goes off without a hitch, and the two make off with a huge fortune, stashing the money at Paulie's apartment and agreeing not to spend any of it for the time being, so as to keep anyone else from finding out. The next day, Tommy stops by Paulie's apartment and finds the door unlocked. Stepping inside, Tommy finds Paulie lying dead on the floor, his back riddled with gunshot wounds. The money's gone, and just then, the phone rings. It's Sam, and he sounds scared. He was hoping to warn Paulie, he says, but it looks like he called too late. Salieri's found out about the robbery and has marked both Paulie and Tommy for death. Sam offers to help Tommy escape and tells Tommy to meet him at the city gallery. When Tommy arrives, however, the whole thing turns out to be a massive double cross. Sam, the money, and some armed hitmen are waiting. Not only has Sam sold Tommy out, but he ratted out Paulie as well. And it wasn't just because of the bank job either. It turns out that Sam and the Don are well aware of Tommy's failure to kill Michelle and Frank, and after the robbery, they've decided that Tommy's nothing but a liability. As Sam's new friends move in to execute Tommy, he takes cover, and a shootout ensues, one that ends with everyone dead except Tommy and Sam. As the two trade shots, Tommy asks Sam how he found out about the people he's allowed to live. Sam replies that Michelle was stupid enough to come back to Lost Heaven. Remember what we said about Mercy biting mobsters in the ass? And as soon as the mob discovered her, Sam was dispatched to finish the job. And once Salieri realized that Tommy was an unreliable killer, it didn't take long for him to find Frank, either. During the shootout, Sam's gun jams at a critical moment. But, once again, Tommy can't bring himself to pull the trigger on a friend. Laughing at Tommy's weakness, Sam staggers away. But as he's escaping, Tommy has a change of heart and shoots him in the back. As Sam lies dying, he tells Tommy that Salieri's men found and executed Frank, and that one way or another, Tommy will suffer the same fate. Tommy then fills Sam full of lead and flees. Following Sam's death, Tommy takes Sarah and their daughter and flees to Europe, but he realizes that if Salieri could find Frank, he'll find them too. Tommy then decides to return stateside and testify against Salieri, at which point he meets up with Detective Norman and begins the conversation that the entire game has been part of. Thanks to Tommy's testimony, Salieri is sent to prison for life. Some of his men are handed death sentences, and the gang is completely dismantled. Tommy, Sarah, and their daughter are taken into the witness protection program and relocated to the West Coast, where Tommy gets a job working for a respectable company. Years later, in 1957, a much older Tommy is watering plants in his suburban front yard. A car pulls up and two men step out, addressing him as Mr. Angelo. When Tommy responds, their words, "Mr. Salieri sends his regards," are immediately followed by a point-blank blast from a sawed-off shotgun. As Tommy lies dying, we hear his final thoughts, in which he once again muses that the simple ambition for a better life was his undoing, and the undoing of all his friends. The end.